Then, my husband and I, got married, Deadpool was made, and then they were looking for a lady pool, so,
Rob Lifeboat,
I was a veil.
allegedly watches this show while he's drawing.
Wow, really? Amazing.
Let me say hi to Rob.
So you're gonna...
Hi, Rob.
When Blake Lively first filed this lawsuit, nobody expected it to become one of the most dissected and misunderstood legal battles in celebrity history. And yet, here we are in a case that was supposed to shine a light on workplace conduct and online harassment. The spotlight has shifted instead to questions of media manipulation, legal overreach, and a relentless public campaign that seems more rooted in performance than in precedent. The judge overseeing this drama, Judge Lyman, has grown noticeably colder toward the repeated filings and circular arguments coming from Blake's team, particularly as they try to blur the lines between legal advocacy and public relations in one of the most telling moments yet. Blake's lawyers attempted to paint Brian Friedman, the attorney representing the Wayfair parties, as nothing more than a media spin artist,
on this project,
arguing that
what
his
were some
public
of the concerns or hesitations that you guys had?
I mean, honestly, I didn't have any hesitations. To me, it was a no-brainer.
But hindsight is 2020.
Statements somehow forfeited his right to legal protections. But the judge saw right through that, calling the argument not just weak but vanishingly thin. And the fallout from that ruling has been swift and stunning for Blake and her inner circle, because what this court made very clear is that Brian Friedman is operating as a lawyer defending his clients against serious public accusations, and that means his communications are protected under the bedrock principles of attorney-client privilege and work product doctrine, period. And it wasn't just Friedman's role that the judge scrutinized. He also called out the broad and invasive discovery demands coming from Blake's team as being legally unnecessary and strategically reckless, whether it was trying to force Wayfair's attorneys to hand over private client documents or demanding communications between lawyers and content creators, or even reaching for journalist correspondence. The court saw all of it as a dangerous attempt to weaponize discovery against the defense and not for legitimate legal inquiry. And this is where the story starts to fracture from its original message, because now, instead of holding the moral high ground, Blake is being viewed more and more as someone leveraging the courts to chase down rumors, shut down press narratives, and punish critics, all while claiming to be a victim of retaliation. And the more that judges and legal analysts weigh in, the more it becomes clear that the actual legal merits of her case are being eclipsed by the sheer aggressiveness of her strategy in the latest decision. The judge acknowledged that Wayfair already told the court they had no documents to produce regarding payments to creators, which should have been the end of it. A technical win for Blake, because there's nothing to withhold, and yet her team continued pushing filing motions, insisting there had to be more, as if the absence of documents was itself suspicious rather than proof that no such transactions occurred. And all of this has started to draw attention from beyond the courtroom, as well, with sources close to the finance and media industries, suggesting that this case is starting to feel less like a lawsuit and more like a branding exercise, or worse, a distraction from other problems. For example, multiple insiders now say that Ryan Reynolds' name has become just as entangled in this as Blake's. Even though he's not formally part of the lawsuit, his name appears in subpoena. After subpoena, his involvement in the failed MNTN IPO is being whispered about in court filings, and there are jokes circulating among finance executives about how bizarre it is that a harassment case is being tied to someone allegedly looking at Blake at a party. And as this case drags on, it's becoming increasingly difficult to separate the legal claims from the Hollywood theatrics, because let's be honest, most of these filings aren't written for the court anymore, they're written for the public. The headlines, the fan base, the narrative, and in the middle of it all is Brian Friedman, who has somehow gone from being a private legal representative to the main target of an aggressive reputational campaign. Blake's team has filed not one but two motions for sanctions against him, trying to paint his public defenses of his clients as unethical or retaliatory, when in reality he's doing exactly what lawyers are supposed to do: defend their clients in public and in court, especially when the attacks against them are coming from someone with one of the most powerful platforms in Hollywood. And the judge agrees, making it crystal clear in his ruling that there is nothing improper about Friedman's comments, nothing that crosses the line into misconduct, and certainly nothing that justifies piercing the veil of attorney-client privilege. Just because Blake doesn't like what he has to say, the court has even warned that trying to subpoena a currently litigating attorney is a major overreach and a direct threat to the adversarial process. And the fact that Blake's team
to take every single text message that exists out there, lay them out, put them on a website for the world to see, Have them see the truth and determine the truth
Protected
for
that his
themselves.
communications are privileged and that any documents she wants should be obtained through Wayfair directly, not through a backdoor raid on their legal counsel. And this distinction matters not just legally, but politically, because it shows how determined the court is to maintain integrity in a case that's threatening to spiral into sensationalism. And it also shows how dangerous it is to confuse a legal defense with a public relations strategy, because in this court, at least those lines are not blurry. They are bright, bold, and immovable. So now that the judge has fully rejected the idea that Brian Friedman is acting as anything but legal counsel and has doubled down on protecting his rights as an attorney, Blake Lively's legal team is left in a tough spot because everything they had been building around the idea of a PR campaign disguised as legal defense is now legally meaningless. The judge specifically stated that even if Friedman was speaking to the media, his comments were inherently tied to his role as counsel, meaning they are part of the litigation strategy, not separate from it. And more importantly, any efforts by Blake's team to characterize those comments as defamatory or retaliatory now run headfirst into privilege protections, which the court just made clear are off limits. And that's where things get really ironic, because the very strategy they used to try to crack the case open has now backfired, turning public attention toward their own tactics and how far they're willing to go to control the story. The filings from Blake's side have begun to look less like traditional legal motions and more like press releases. Carefully worded, carefully timed, and designed to shape public opinion. More than persuade a judge, even. The language of the latest sanction request reads more like a social media thread than a legal document, accusing Friedman of launching a media war and destroying her credibility, as if credibility is something that gets preserved through court orders instead of evidence. But here's the catch. Bestie credibility does not come from silencing critics or subpoenaing journalists or accusing lawyers of being too effective. It comes from consistency, transparency, and a willingness to be questioned. And that is exactly where Blake's argument is falling apart, because now that she's lost her bid to get internal communications, now that she's been told she can't access confidential engagement letters or discovery from lawyers who aren't even named in the suit, she is not backing down. She is doubling down again, filing new sanction motions while the old ones haven't even been ruled on yet. And this persistence might play well in the court of public opinion for some fans. But to the judge, it's just starting to look like noise. And more importantly, retaliation. Retaliation against the very people she claims are retaliating against her. Which is not a good look in any court. In fact, the judge's ruling carefully explained how discovery needs to be proportional, relevant, and not an undue burden. And by targeting lawyers and creators and journalists who aren't directly part of the case, Blake's team was trying to create a chilling effect on speech and defense strategies. And that's exactly what the judge said he would not allow. And if that weren't enough, the court even offered her other paths, suggesting she go through proper interrogatories or targeted discovery toward Wayfair itself, not through sweeping third-party subpoenas. And yet, instead of pivoting or adapting, Blake is filing again, claiming Friedman's comments to podcasts, journalists, and legal outlets are part of a coordinated media attack. But what is she expecting the judge to do? Revoke a lawyer's right to speak in defense of their clients, especially when he's not saying anything that hasn't already been said in court filings, already reviewed by the court, already rejected, or already disclosed to the public in previous hearings. And then there's the Ryan Reynolds angle. Again, somehow his name keeps reappearing in documents and allegations and claims of bad faith coordination between his marketing campaigns and the alleged smear operation against Blake. And once again, it's being met with collective confusion from both the court and the public, because Ryan is not named in the suit. He's not listed as a defendant, and yet his reputation is being dragged in court documents in a way that feels strategic and retaliatory, not evidence-based. The judge even called it out, noting that Blake's team can't use legal filings to attack reputations, especially when the people being named have no right of reply in court. And that's the deeper issue here: the misuse of the legal system. Not for justice, but for headlines and narratives. And the people noticing this shift are not just legal analysts or YouTubers. They include executives, investors, and industry figures who are quietly distancing themselves from the chaos. Not because they've taken sides, but because this case no longer looks like a sincere search for justice. It looks like a prolonged media performance where every ruling is followed by a press push, every denial is spun as bias, and every loss is reframed as a moral victory. And now even those who once sympathized with Blake are starting to ask the same question: if the truth is on her side, why are so many of her tactics being called into question? And why does her team keep losing in court? The truth is that the longer this case drags on, the more it resembles a cautionary tale. Not about harassment, not even about defamation, but about what happens when celebrity legal strategy becomes indistinguishable from celebrity. PR and how dangerous it can be to weaponize the courts against public perception, because eventually the public notices and so do the judges, and that's exactly what's happening now. At this point, Bestie, the judge has already drawn a clear boundary between what is legally permissible and what is an overreach, and yet Blake's team continues to push past it like a contestant who refuses to believe they've been eliminated. From the game ignoring the buzzer and playing for an audience that's no longer clapping. And what's wild is that the very tactic they're using to try and control the narrative is now the same thing turning people against them, because the filings read more like PR manifestos than legal arguments built on substance, like asking the court to sanction Brian Friedman for doing interviews, where he simply says the lawsuit lacks evidence or that his client is being falsely accused, which is what every lawyer says in every defamation case ever. But to Blake's team, this is framed as a coordinated media assault. They want to paint every statement as a smear, every rebuttal as an attack, every interview as unethical. And while that might work in tabloids or Twitter threads, it does not land in federal court, especially not when the judge has already ruled that the communications in question are protected, and that Friedman is operating as legal counsel and not as a rogue spokesperson freelancing gossip in the press. But here's the thing, Bestie. What's really bothering the court now is the pattern, the sheer volume of filings, the tone of the arguments, the constant accusations that the court itself is missing something or allowing something unjust to happen. It's like every ruling that doesn't go Blake's way gets followed by a new motion that restates the same argument dressed up in different language. And at a certain point, even the most impartial judge starts to see that for what it is, an attempt to exhaust the process, not to win the case on merit, but to shape the playing field through noise and delay. And that's exactly what's happening. Now the latest sanctions request is nothing new. It's the same podcast, quotes the same press statements, the same rhetorical moves repackaged as if they're fresh offenses, when really they're just a rerun. And the irony is that the very act of filing these motions could be interpreted as retaliatory, because what are you doing when a judge tells you no and you keep trying to punish the opposing counsel for defending their clients? You're not seeking justice, you're seeking revenge. And that's not a good look in any courtroom. Especially not when the judge is already signaling that he's losing patience with this cycle of accusations and counter-accusations. And it's not just the judge who's watching this spiral. Investors are watching, media insiders are watching, legal experts are watching, and everyone is beginning to say the same thing. This is not how people with strong cases behave, because if the facts are on your side, you let the facts speak. If you have evidence, you present it, if the truth is clear. You don't need to subpoena everyone who's ever posted about the case or force lawyers to break privilege just to get a quote. And now the spotlight is shifting back toward Wayfair, toward Ryan Reynolds, toward the bigger picture of whether this lawsuit was ever about the claims on paper, or if it was a broader attempt to reframe a public relations disaster as a personal crusade. And there's a reason this matters beyond celebrity drama, because when high-profile cases get wrapped in personal vendettas, it undermines the credibility of real victims. It pollutes the legal conversation, and it makes it harder for people to take genuine claims seriously. And that's where this case is now sitting on the edge of credibility with every filing, pushing it closer to farce. And it's not just about Blake anymore. Ryan's presence in the paperwork is so pervasive that people are now openly asking whether he's the actual architect of this whole legal offensive using his wife's name and platform as cover while trying to clean up his own reputation post. MNTN IPO failure, post-marketing campaign collapse, post-industry whispers that he's more brand than brains. And whether that's fair or not doesn't really matter, because perception in the court of public opinion matters just as much as rulings in court. And right now, the perception is not good. It's all starting to feel like a strategy of distraction and deflection rather than legal redress, and the court is no longer entertaining it. The language of the latest ruling was polite but final, saying clearly that the documents being requested were irrelevant, that they posed an undue burden, and that the attorney-client relationship would not be pierced just because Blake wants a different story told. And that's the deeper truth here, Bestie. That this is not about truth at all anymore. It's about control, about managing fallout, about turning a court case into a narrative arc that just happens to come with a judge and a docket number. And when you're playing that game, there are only two outcomes. You either win fast and clean, or you lose slowly and painfully. And right now, it's looking like the latter. And now, bestie. We enter the phase of the case where every move made by Blake Lively and her legal team is under a magnifying glass, and the reflection isn't flattering. Because while the court has already ruled that attorney-client privilege will be protected, and that Brian Friedman was well within his rights to make public statements defending his clients, Blake continues to act like she's been wronged by the entire system, and she files new motions as if hoping that persistence alone will change the law. But the legal system doesn't bend to drama or repetition. It responds to facts, evidence, and precedent. And that is exactly where her arguments keep falling short. The judge already said she can't access internal communications between Wayfair and its attorneys because they are protected, yet she keeps trying to reframe those same requests in different language, calling them necessary or non-privileged when they've already been denied. And it's starting to look like she's not just misunderstanding the ruling, she's willfully ignoring it. And that has consequences not just in court but in the industry as well, because no one wants to do business with someone who uses litigation as a tool for reputation management or revenge. And that's exactly what this is starting to look like. Bestie, a campaign, not a case, and it's exhausting even for her own team, who now have to refile motions that are just variations of old ones, hoping to catch the judge in a different mood, or a technicality that might open a door already closed. And meanwhile, Brian Friedman is doing what any defense attorney would do. He's standing by his clients, speaking on their behalf and reinforcing their position in the media, because this is not a private matter, it's a public lawsuit. And if Blake wants to bring these claims in public, she has to expect public responses. But instead of answering the arguments with evidence or showing how her case still holds water, she's going after the people who speak against her filing sanctions, accusing them of retaliation, claiming media quotes are personal attacks, and all the while the public is starting to question the strategy, because it feels less like seeking justice and more like silencing criticism. And let's be honest, bestie, that's never a good look. Especially not when your case is already under scrutiny and your key arguments are being thrown out one by one. And then there's Ryan Reynolds, again, dragged into the filings referenced in motions and mentioned in accusations as if his celebrity alone proves something, but he's not a defendant, not a party, and not even deposed. And yet his name appears more than some of the actual defendants, and it's starting to look like he's being used as a symbol of something bigger. Maybe power, maybe influence, maybe distraction, but either way, it's not working. Because the court isn't interested in symbols, it's interested in facts. And every time his name shows up without a clear legal connection, it just reinforces the idea that this case is about publicity, not principle. And that is a dangerous narrative, especially when you're trying to convince a judge that your rights have been violated and your reputation destroyed. Because if the destruction you're claiming is coming from your own filings and your own quotes about your husband and your own strategy of overexposure, then who's really to blame? And that's the question more and more people are asking, not just in court, but across Hollywood, across legal circles, across the media. Who is driving this case, who is benefiting from it, and who is being hurt by it? And the answers are becoming clearer with every passing day, because the more Blake pushes, the more resistance she faces, and the more she files, the more obvious it becomes that she is trying to fight a media war in a courtroom, and the judge is not having it. The ruling was firm. Privilege stands. Media comments are not sanctionable. The attorney is allowed to defend his client. And attempts to spin those actions into misconduct are not only unsupported, they are suspect. And that's where things stand now, with Blake facing a court that sees through the theater and a public that's growing weary of the performance. And yet, there's still more to come, because she's not done. And neither is the fallout from what's already been revealed. And that brings us to part 5 as the dust settles around the latest courtroom ruling. Blake Lively is not taking the loss quietly. Instead, she's responding with more aggression, more filings, and more attempts to reframe the narrative, which is beginning to unravel with each motion she submits. Because the judge has already made it clear that privilege exists for a reason, and trying to pierce that veil without sufficient cause is not only improper, it's unethical. And yet her legal team continues to insist that Brian Friedman's statements are somehow outside the scope of his duties as legal counsel, despite the court spelling out that they are very much inside that scope and protected accordingly. So what does Blake do? She files a second motion for sanctions, doubling down on the idea that these statements made to podcasts and news outlets are coordinated character assassinations and not legal commentary. And in doing so, she exposes the weakness of her position, because she's not arguing evidence, she's arguing perception, and that's a battle you rarely win in court, especially when the judge has already ruled. against you on these exact points. And while she's pushing these motions, the broader legal community is watching, and many are questioning the strategy. Because it's one thing to fight for your rights. It's another to weaponize procedure against opposing counsel in a way that feels retaliatory and performative, and that's the line she's now walking. And the consequences are showing in the press, in investor confidence, in public sentiment, and in the whispers from insiders who know how the game is played. Because behind the scenes, people are talking about how this case has shifted from a legal matter to a personal crusade. And not in a flattering way. They're noting the contradictions, the overreach, the inconsistency between the claims made in court, and the narrative pushed in the media, and it's all creating a credibility gap that Blake seems unable or unwilling to close. And that gap is growing wider with every ruling that goes against her, because instead of pivoting and building a stronger case, she's locking herself into a strategy that no longer works. And meanwhile, Wayfair and Friedman are doing what any seasoned defendants would do. They are narrowing the scope, focusing the argument, and letting the court speak for them. And that strategy is working because the more they stay on message, the more Blake's side appears chaotic, emotional, and driven by something other than the pursuit of truth. And that perception is powerful, because in high-profile litigation, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, how you frame it, how you respond to defeat, and how you adapt to new rulings. And on that front, Blake's legal strategy is not adapting, it's repeating, looping back over the same issues, trying to get different results from the same arguments. And the court is noticing, and not in a good way. And the public is noticing too, because each denial, each sanctioned request, each overhyped media narrative that falls flat, chips away at the original premise of the lawsuit, that this was about justice, about truth, about accountability, and replaces it with the idea that this was always about control, about image, about fighting shadows instead of facts. And that shift is costing her more than just court losses. It's costing her trust, influence, and possibly her ability to move forward with future cases and future projects. Because the industry has a long memory and a short patience for lawsuits that don't deliver. And right now, this case looks more like a spectacle than a cause. And the audience is beginning to walk out. Not because they've chosen sides, but because they've grown tired of the show. And unless something dramatic changes, unless new evidence emerges or a new strategy is adopted, this case is heading toward a quiet dismissal, not with a bang, but with a long, slow fade into irrelevance, as judges close the file and the world moves on to the next controversy.
This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings and no guilt is implied until proven in court, please. Keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.